Alright guys, hope you're all doing well, hope you're all keeping safe, hopefully you all had a very good weekend. Now on a daily basis I see forum posts, tweets, Reddit posts and every type of post possible talking about how the Division 2 really dropped the ball and the Division 1 is far superior. I actually agree with that. I've not held back when talking about how I spent kind of every day playing the Division 1, but I just cannot do the same here with the Division 2 for numerous reasons. With that said, I know there are things the Division 2 does better than the Division, and if a third installment is in the works, as I believe it is, I think it's worth pointing out what the Division 2 does do better than the Division. I don't expect any devs to watch this video, but making this video would at least allow me to feel like I'm contributing to a third installment that I hope selects all of the good things from both games and implements them into this new game, and that way giving us all the things that the community believes will make the perfect Division game. If you enjoy this one, drop a like down below, comment, subscribe as well if you want. Really does help me out. And with that said, let's begin. So for number one, I've got the open world. Now the open world of the Division 2 is one of the best in the business in my opinion. In terms of the environmental design, I do prefer the Division, with its snow, its kind of cold and abandoned feeling. But the Division 2 brings with it the living open world. Now this is by far my favourite part of the Division 2 and seen me spend more time here than anywhere else because there's always something going on, whether that be a public execution, a territory control activity, or my favourite personally, and that's the control point. Now the Division's world, it felt pretty lifeless, which kind of made sense in terms of the game and the story, but it meant there was rarely anything to do there. Most of the time you kind of just fast travelled to places rather than actually spend any time in the world. I actually rarely spent any time in the open world of the Division because of that fact. And if there is a third installment, a living open world has to be top of the list for me. Now like I said, aside from the snow, the Division 2's world is 100 times better than the Division, and that makes sense because that is what the devs envisaged for this game. They decided the Division 2 would focus more on the open world rather than game mode, some of the Division had a lot more of and some of the Division 2 really lacks. Without a doubt in my mind, this is where the Division 2 really shines when comparing it to the Division. For number two, we've got raids. Now the Division had incursions, the Division 2 has raids. Now whilst I think the Division incursions were way more accessible than raids, I really do think the raids have been a huge success, albeit with some improvements like having 4 players instead of 8. I think the devs did a great job with adding the discovery modes to these raids as a way to kind of encourage players to learn the mechanics before jumping into the actual raid. It kind of gave the majority of people a way in. Now whilst I did enjoy incursions from the Division, I think raids are just way better. I do think this may be a controversial point, to be honest, because I know a lot of people would prefer having incursions back rather than raids, and that's fine of course, but I've interacted with the raids way more than I ever did with incursions in the Division. They actually remind me of Destiny raids a little bit, with various mechanics that require a lot of group play to complete, especially Iron Horse, which was my favourite by far due to this very reason. It was mechanics over damage for the most part, and that was something we didn't get from the first raid. If they did bring raids back with the Division 3, I'd be pretty happy about that. Actually, I'd be very happy about that, as long as it didn't take away from the rest of the game. One of my biggest criticisms about raids from the Division 2 is it felt like it took away from the rest of the game. And what I mean by take away is development time. Now that may not be the case, but it felt that way. So as long as they could bring raids and do all the other stuff that people have been asking for, I'd really like to see raids in the Division 3. And I think we could just kind of not have incursions. I think raids are fine as long as it's 4 players instead of 8, because I think that's where incursions trump raids, is in its accessibility, and that's just because raids have require 8 players for the majority rather than the 4 that we got from incursions. So yeah, raids over incursions any day. Now for number 3, we've got NPC or AI. Now as much as I moan about NPC balance, we still have a lot of grenade spam in the game. It feels like with every update we get grenade spam back. And all the other things about NPCs that we all find annoying or frustrating. There's no doubt that NPC variety and behaviour is way ahead of what was offered up in the Division. Does it get annoying when I'm constantly getting flanked? Of course, yes, and the devs are always iterating on particular NPC behaviour that players find frustrating, but I really enjoy the advanced movement from NPCs in the game because it makes each encounter that much more engaging and challenging. The Division didn't really do that for me, and that's probably why I spent the majority of my time in the Division in PvP, not just because PvP was better than the Division 2, but because I didn't really interact with the PvE that well. I found the enemies here in the Division were just bullet sponges for the most part, like the Division 2, but with little to no real kind of advanced movement. The Division 2 AI is way more engaging, it's way more exciting to fight against, and this, along with the open world, makes almost every interaction with them feel different. I know for some of you guys, you're probably in the comments typing about how NPCs are overtuned, hitting you with SMGs from 100 meters, and they could be improved on, and I totally agree. They are nowhere near perfect here, and the devs could always iterate on NPCs, and we're always going to find imperfections with them. But at the very least, they are not boring to fight. Even when I don't need to use my weapon and, you know, I kind of just let my skills do their thing, they're not boring to fight against, which is something I found with NPCs from the Division. They were fairly boring to fight against for the most part. It's like PvP from the Division. A lot of it was broken, but at least it was fun. For number 4 is build diversity. Now, when I was writing the script for this, I wasn't totally sure whether build diversity in the Division 2 was better or there was more of it than the Division. So what I actually did is I went back and played. I actually went back onto the Division to check it out. Now, I'm not talking about loot quality or gear sets, nothing like that. This is just purely build diversity. So when I went back to the Division, I just had to look on my loadouts to see what I had saved and compared them to the builds that I found in the Division 2. Now, in my loadouts, of which there are only 6, whereas in the Division 2 with T12, I believe it's going to be 16, I had 5 gear set loadouts, which included D3 FNC or defense. There was a Deadeye build for PvP, Striker build, Lone Star, and Nomad, and there was one more which was a Tactician's build that had an exotic mask and a high-end backpack. I looked through my other gear that was just on my character, and the majority of builds, you know, they're made up of gear sets, which felt great, of course, but the Division 2 just has so many more options, with more and more being added with each new season. The build that I've been using for some time in the Division 2, for example, is a skill damage DPS hybrid. You've probably seen it in all my videos. It's probably being used in the actual footage for this video. This type of build, that means I can do some weapon damage, but my turret and drone output the majority of my damage. That kind of build is just not possible in the Division. The synergy between gear, weapons, and skills within the Division 2 is superior to the Division. It used to be that with each update you'd have kind of one meta build, like when Predator's Mark was OP. In the Division 2, like every other looter shooter, there are metas, but there are normally many builds that fit into that meta rather than just kind of one gear set that's the outlier. I remember the Division, we had the Seeker Mine stuff, we had the Striker stuff, we had the Predator's Mark stuff. You know, it's kind of one meta at a time. We don't have that here with the Division 2. You get a variety of stuff. Now, I did love the Division the Division gear, don't get me wrong. There's no doubt about that, because all of the gear was impactful. Whereas the Division 2, you know, there's a lot of gear which really doesn't have a place and could be removed without anyone kind of batting an eyelid. I guess that's the only thing I preferred from the Division, was the fact that almost all of it kind of felt impactful. But overall, I think build diversity is superior in the Division 2. There you go, guys. That's 4 things I think the Division 2 does better than the Division. If you disagree with me, leave your comments down below in the comments section explaining why. I'm sure some of you guys will, and that's obviously fine. Also, if you have any more, then feel free to leave them down there as well. As always, guys, really appreciate all of your support on my videos. I'm actually excited for Season 4, which should be coming out in the next week or so, my prediction being Tuesday the 8th of December. So make sure you've got notifications turned on if you don't want to miss my coverage of that season, which will be the final season of Year 2. Thanks for watching, and Epic out.